I'm Joe Devine, and welcome to the Tifo Football podcast, and a Happy New Year to all of you following the Gregorian calendar. Today, I was joined by Alex Stewart to do a roundup of the season at the midway point, or just afterwards. We talk about each team briefly and tactically, and in some cases not very tactically. You'll find out which managers we didn't know had gone or were still there. Mostly in my case, Alex is more up on these things. And also, I'd like to remind you that as of the 3rd of January, the first 3 episodes of Josh's new podcast, This Football Life, which will be a Tifo output, will be available. That's Wednesday the 3rd of January. So I urge you to go and subscribe to that. We'll provide links and stuff when it comes out. Follow us on our social handles if you don't already. We are at Tifo Football _ on Twitter and Instagram. I believe Tifo Football was already taken. But do follow us there because you'll get quick access to all new videos and podcasts, etc. I do talk about this a bit in the video towards the end as well, but Alex and I are still planning on pushing out a new Tifo Tactics podcast. We just want to spend a couple more weeks on the format so that we can get it as good as possible. But thanks very much for downloading this podcast. I hope you all enjoyed a good Christmas, those of you who celebrate it, and a Happy New Year, again, those of you living by the Gregorian calendar. So today we thought we'd have a look at the Premier League table and go through team by team, albeit briefly, and have a quick discussion about the tactics of each team, the coaches, and how their outlook and style has served them so far. So Alex, I thought it would make most sense to start at the top of the league. We've talked about Manchester City quite a lot already this season. I'm not really sure what's left to say, to be honest. We've looked at the fact that they spent a lot of money on fullbacks, and that's, the reasons behind that. That makes a lot of sense. We've looked at the utilisation of Kevin De Bruyne. I think something interesting that's happened since the last Manchester City video we made, and from a tactics perspective, is that David Silva's really come into his own again. But is there anything you can think to say about this team that we haven't already?
I just in awe of how good they are, really. I mean, there was some quite interesting discussion, I think, was it yesterday or the day before on Twitter about, and that's a rarity, isn't it? Interesting discussion on Twitter, but it did happen, about how you might label the position that someone like De Bruyne plays, and also, potentially Son Heung-min at Spurs, that kind of not quite a central midfielder, not quite an attacking midfielder, and there's the Spanish term, the interiores, which is kind of like an inside forward, but not quite. And then someone said that De Bruyne himself in an interview had referred to it as a false 8, right. Which is kind of... So I don't know whether terminology is getting a little bit silly now, but it does throw up an interesting question of the fact that City are achieving this style of play by having 2 players in David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne who are not traditional central midfielders and are not traditional attacking midfielders. And that kind of... It would be reductive to say that it's simply because of that kind of tactical change around that teams are baffled by them. I mean, there's a lot of individual skill, there's a lot of pace, there's a lot of the way that Pep's coached it, but it is interesting, kind of, I suppose, as a reminder that actually teams are used to playing against, some kind of set way of playing, and you would usually expect your central midfielders to face up against your central midfielders and your wingers to face up against your fullbacks and so on and so forth. And when there's a player like Fernandinho who can allow the 2 kind of shuttling midfielders either side of him to not be that and to actually be much more advanced and much more mobile, that in itself is enough to create problems for teams. And then when those players are as good as they are, then that makes it even harder. But I think we just have to recognise that we're watching, a side who have the potential, and it's. I think the fact they'll win the league is fairly obvious, but the degree to which that's done, how they can match that success in Europe, the sort of unbeaten run that they can put together, we are potentially looking at certainly one of the great sides of the Premier League era, potentially one of the great sides ever. So
we say that the opposition teams are baffled by them. Is there any example so far this season of an opposition team that have set up in the correct way, that have looked to limit City, that have looked like they could have done something?
I think the difficulty is even the teams who defend brilliantly, teams like Burnley, or I think that there are other examples of teams that set out to nullify more than attack. You can. I think I've said this before on this podcast. I can't remember whether it was Jamie Carragher or Gary Neville who said it, but every team presents their opposition team with a set of problems to solve, and the best teams are the ones that solve those problems the quickest. And Man City, just with the intelligence they have, the flexibility they have, and the individual skill they have, can solve pretty much any problem. And yes, you could set up effectively to cede all possession and play, 10 men behind the ball, and they'd still find some kind of way of getting through. So I haven't seen a team that looks as likely to go unbeaten all season in as long as I can remember. And I think crucially they seem to have sorted out their issues defensively as well. Stones has been playing well, Company's played well when he's come back in, Otamendi's having a great season, Ederson at the back sets the tempo for the whole thing with his high line, his superb distribution, and he's not a bad shot stopper by any stretch of the imagination either. So they just seem to be the complete package currently.
High praise indeed. Okay, let's move on to second, Manchester United. Halfway through the season, halfway through Mourinho's traditional 3 years. It was such a great start to December for Manchester United, who, if you remember, beat Arsenal away 3-1. Good results in the Champions League, positive in the Premier League. With that loss to Manchester City at Old Trafford, they started a little fumble, and have drawn the last two games, Leicester and crucially as well at home to Burnley. It's interesting now, isn't it? Because at the beginning of the season, I remember it being, a case of two Manchester teams, one of which was incredibly attacking and fluid and, it was Pep Guardiola football. The other was slightly more defensive and almost more traditional in a way, but Romelu Lukaku was scoring multiple goals every game, and you just thought, maybe he can pull them through. Now, you could park a bus between the difference that you see in those two teams, couldn't you?
You could. And look, we know that Mourinho is a pragmatic coach. And I think if you were to sum up the difference between the two, Pep Guardiola is a coach who has a very definitive style of play that he forces other teams to deal with. And Mourinho is much more adept at looking what the other team wants to do and then seeking to nullify it and relying on maybe one or two players of real quality to go and get a goal for him. Lukaku has done well. I think Jesse Lingard deserves possibly higher praise than... Lingard's one of those odd players. You even see it on, dare I refer to them as such, but Manchester United Twitter. He's clearly a divisive figure, but he's exactly the sort of player that Mourinho likes. He will do what is required of him defensively, and every so often he'll pop up with an assist or with a goal even that takes the game away from the opposition. So Mourinho is certainly still in a building phase. I think there's still a lot of players in that squad that he's not entirely comfortable with. I think it's odd.
Well,
for example,
he recently said that £300 million of spend clearly wasn't enough. So
Yeah, well, it's difficult to know how to read that, because in absolute terms, is he saying I need to spend another 300 million to get the squad that I want? Or is he saying in relative terms, 300 million still pales into insignificance compared with what City have been able to throw around, and that's the gap. And it's hard to know, is he saying, we need to spend that money to overhaul them, or we need to spend that money for me to get a squad that I'm happy with, which I suppose by implication would then allow him to challenge City more? Or is he effectively resigning himself to the fact that he is not going to win? He's not going to beat them this season, and casting around for some sort of rationale. I mean, look, I think Mourinho is a talented manager, and he certainly has good players at his disposal in that squad, and it's a marked improvement on how they've been doing, before he came in. I think everyone can accept that. Plus, he won, he won last season. he won the Europa League, so he's not exactly doing badly.
But also 43 points after 20 games. They'd be on, in theory, for 86 by the end, or close to 86 by the end of the season. Many other, I think the stats a few weeks back showed that in at least half of other Premier League seasons, they'd be top of the league. They're not doing badly.
No, absolutely.
But I think you can, if you look at the difference between Manchester United this season, it almost pales in comparison to some of the great Manchester United sides of the past, and then Manchester City, who, as you said, are potentially one of the greatest. I mean, they haven't lost a game.
No,
they've drawn one game.
Yeah,
they've won every other game. It's incredible.
It is incredible. Look, Manchester United, you're not going to get with Jose Mourinho a classic kind of Sir Alex Ferguson swashbuckling wingers, a great centre-forward pairing kind of play. I mean, that's partly because 4-4-2, which was Ferguson's preferred formation for a significant period of time before moving to that kind of 4-3-3 lopsided. That's, that isn't in fashion anymore. But Mourinho, I suppose what Mourinho has probably managed to do better than maybe any other manager could have done is to go into a dressing room that was clearly losing belief in itself and belief in what it means to be a Manchester United player. And this is the most successful club of the last 20 years, incontrovertibly. So those players, and many of whom were around for Van Gaal and for Moyes and for the tail end of the Ferguson era, had started to kind of lose sight of what it means to do that. And Mourinho, because of the way he is, because of the way he manages, because of the way he creates this kind of us against them, everybody's against us, whether it's refereeing decisions or it's the financial power of City or whatever it is, first and foremost, Mourinho is, yes, he's good at setting up to nullify the opposition and grind out results, but he's also good at reminding a club of who they are in terms of that arrogance, and I don't think when you're dealing with Mourinho personally, that arrogance can come across unpleasantly, for sure. But I think the great teams need to have that arrogance. They need to believe that they are the best and that they should go out and win every single game and crush the opposition. And that's that City are playing like that. City are playing like when they take to the pitch, the result is a foregone conclusion. They just keep going and keep going and keep going until they score. And it's inevitable. And other teams taking to the pitch against City will know that. And they'll look at it the same way. They'll think, it's just a matter of time before we get turned over here. And that's how United used to take to the pitch under Ferguson. And they had players like Cantona or like Dwight York or Tevez or Ronaldo who embodied that spirit.
Ole Gunnar Solskjaer.
No, not Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. No.
What are you talking about? He was a solution for any game in which it was a draw past 80 minutes.
Yes, I know, but I love Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and I think what he's done at Mulder is fantastic. But I don't think you could argue that he had quite the same kind of hubris as someone like Cantona. He was the baby-faced assassin for a reason. Yeah,
right. I'm aware that we've talked for over half of our allotted time about the top two teams, which was probably inevitable.
I think that's reasonable, though. Yeah.
So do I. Although I would like to squeeze everyone in if possible.
Okay. Well, we can do sort of like one-word reviews.
Well, maybe we might have to do that when we get to mid-table. Obviously, the bottom of the table is slightly more interesting. Mid-table, perhaps we could do one-word reviews.
Yes.
And let's bear in mind, keep it tactical. Chelsea.
Yeah.
We haven't really talked about them very much this season. The one player that we have talked about recently is Eden Hazard and his slightly different role in the team. I'm not sure what we could say to expand on what we did last year, but give us a little line of appraisal. Obviously, as well, in the table, third, they are only 1 point behind Manchester United. They're not far off second at all there. It's probably a foregone conclusion that the league has won, but in terms of runners-up, they're definitely second in the running for sure.
Yeah, and the top six is still very tight generally. I think Chelsea they've shifted subtly tactically. I think they're still trying to work out how to integrate all of the attacking potential that they have in that side, and they've settled with this, or by and large, with Cesc Fabregas kind of, I suppose, a little bit in a De Bruyne-ish role. Let's call it the false 8. Pushing up a bit, Hazard as a 10, and then a bit more solidity with Kante and either Tiembe Bakayoko or Danny Drinkwater, providing a bit of steel in the midfield. The wing-backs are still successful. They've stuck with that general sense of how they played last season. I think that the changes are subtle. Antonio Rudiger, I think, has impressed defensively. And him and Azpilicueta are very good as the kind of wider centre-backs. Long and short passing impressively. Christensen as the one who can step out and carry the ball as the kind of heir apparent to David Luiz is playing really, really well. And I think has the ability to play in the deeper central midfield role as well. They're a team who haven't maybe transitioned as much as some of the other ones. They're making subtle tweaks to what worked so well last season,
and it's still working.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody would have.
There's a new bar.
There is a new bar, and I don't think people would have necessarily predicted City to do as well relatively as they have done, to sweep away people with so much ease. So.
I'd like to just point out that if you go back to the beginning of the season in our podcast, Alex, that's exactly what I did. Well, I won't brag about it.
Don't
from
brag
this
about
moment,
it and mention it.
Apart from right now, where I am bragging about it.
That's fine. It's
Do you know what my logic was?
They're really good at football.
That's it. They've got lots of money. They've got lots of money. They're really good at football. And if I say this at the beginning of every season, at one time it will be true. Yeah. And this year it finally worked out for me.
Well done you.
Liverpool in fourth place. Yeah, it's very exciting for Liverpool. I think the main thing we have to say about Liverpool, and this is probably a good way of illustrating it, 7 games they've played in December, right? And apart from 2 of them, which against Everton, which is obviously a fiercely fought derby, and against West Brom, which is a hard game for anyone to score any goals in, here's their other goal tallies. 5, 7, 4, 3, 5.
Yeah.
I mean, what is going on?
They've got 3 really good attackers.
Right.
Who are
Is it a case of being good at football again?
It's a case of good football.
Right.
I mean,
I should have known.
Liverpool are, Liverpool are the stereotype of Liverpool under Klopp. They are brilliant going forwards, and they're still prone to disastrous errors at the back. I think the signing of Van Dijk is. I wouldn't say it's savvy because it was blindingly obvious that was what they should do, but it's definitely going to help them. He brings the kind of aerial defensive presence that they've been lacking. He is comfortably as good on the ball. His stats are down this season, despite playing for a possession-based side currently in Southampton, but we know that his passing has the potential to easily be as good as anybody else in that side.
Jamie Carragher says he's as good as Rio Ferdinand.
I wouldn't say he's that good. Personally, I think Ferdinand I think Ferdinand had greater athleticism, particularly along the ground. I think Van Dijk's probably a bit better in the air.
So when they bring him in, what is he going to change straight away? What will they be using him for?
I think he'll organise the line better. I think he'll give confidence to those around him. I think probably the ideal pairing is to have him alongside Matip. And then you've got two pretty mobile centre-backs. Matip's more mobile than Van Dijk, but he will win the aerial battles. He's by far and away the best statistically in the league this season for winning aerial duels. He will also quite comfortably slot into the passing out of the back style and the quick transitions to the fullbacks or to deep dropping central midfielders. So there won't be any kind of loss there either. He is just a better defender than those players they've currently got in that position. And he does have that kind of confidence. I mean, you can see, as a Southampton fan, I'm used to watching it. We play better as a defensive unit when he is there, and that's not just because he does stuff well. It's because he tells the other players where to be. It's because he takes the lead. It's because he doesn't shirk away from challenges. And that organisational ability and that kind of leading by example will have a significant impact on a defence that has looked shaky. I mean, it's not that the Liverpool defenders are necessarily in and of themselves bad players. It's because they have a tendency to kind of panic and get pulled out of position. And he'll stop that happening because he'll shout at them until they're in the right place.
Okay, Tottenham, similar to Liverpool, I should say, in the sense that they score a lot of goals, but they've had their ups and downs. One thing you can mention about Tottenham, one consistency, I suppose, throughout the months of this season so far, is that they have, almost without exception, and that exception being Liverpool, lost to any team that has been up or around them in the top six. They've also lost to teams like Leicester. They lost to West Ham in the Cup. On the other hand, scoring a lot of goals, Harry Kane has broken a very notable record for goal scoring in a calendar year, taken off of Alan Shearer, I believe. And also they are doing incredibly well in the Champions League. They beat Real Madrid, they beat Borussia Dortmund. They're doing well in Europe in a way that they haven't before. What's going on there under Pochettino, and are we seeing anything different?
I haven't noticed that they're doing anything particularly different. I think maybe Eriksen's dropping a little deeper, and Ali or Son or both are pushing a little higher.
Well, Son's a good point, actually, isn't he? Because he's not so much a surprise fixture in that he did very well last season as well, but he's doing particularly well this season, scoring quite a few goals.
Yeah, he is. And I think, when you talk about the really top players in the Premier League, it's, unless you're a Spurs fan, Son isn't really mentioned, and I think he's absolutely up there with he's probably in the top 10 players currently in terms of not just what he produces as an individual output, but how he works within the system that he plays in, and he just has continued to kind of pass under the radar. It'll be really interesting to see how he does with South Korea in the World Cup, actually, because he is their key guy in that competition, and he's probably carrying a lot on him, and he seems very, very capable of dealing with that. And he could be really outstanding come the summer. I think Spurs are. I don't know whether it's that I don't want to say they've been found out, but as we said, teams, Spurs and Chelsea, neither of them have adapted enormously from how they've been playing, and it may be that the reason that Spurs are doing well in Europe is because the style that they're playing in is something that their European opponents don't come up against quite so much.
Yeah.
Whereas within the league now, particularly as you say, that the teams above them, they're kind of used to it because it's what they saw last season. I mean, Pochettino is a remarkably consistent manager, and while there have been some formational changes between his time at Southampton and his time at Spurs, the style and the use of players has been remarkably consistent.
Also, there's a new bar. I don't want to keep harping on about it.
Well, you
but
do.
They're only 6 points off Manchester United, who, as we've already said, in half of the other Premier League seasons would be top of the league with their points tally.
Yeah.
So let's extrapolate that for Tottenham. In half of the history of the Premier League seasons, Tottenham would be, a handful of points off top spot.
Sure.
But there's a new bar.
Yeah, there's a new bar. There is a new bar.
And they're 21 points behind Manchester City.
They are. But I think, Spurs are... That top six seems as kind of thoroughly sorted and differentiated from the other 14 sides this season as it's been in a while. And Spurs have definitely firmly established themselves in that tier, and like you say, are doing exceptionally in Europe. So that's where their focus is now going to lie. I think anybody other than probably United and Chelsea have got no chance of winning the league, and I think United and Chelsea have got about a 1% chance of winning the league. So, Pochettino can gear up for Europe, and there is you need to maintain the momentum. You can't sack off the league to the extent that you start going into big European games on a run of losses, because that affects morale and all the rest of it. But I think it's very clear that Spurs could be semi-finalists in the Champions League. That's not. I don't think they're necessarily strong enough to win it, because they've done very well against Real Madrid, but there are still big sides out there. Possibly PSG's, I don't know.
Sure.
Barcelona are always, a threat. Bayern are always a threat. So Juventus, it's hard to see Spurs quite being able to deal with those teams, but at the same time, who knows?
Well, one team that won't be a threat in the Champions League this season is Arsenal in sixth place.
They won't be a threat to
identical points record.
Either.
No, they won't. Identical points record, and including wins, draws, losses to Tottenham. But in true Arsenal fashion, in recent years, I should say, they've scored less and conceded more. But they're on 37 points. Do talk to me about Arsenal, because I haven't watched any of their games for the last month or two, and I've got no idea what's going on.
So I watched the first half of yesterday's game against Palace, but I was making a stir fry. Mm-hmm. So my concentration levels were reduced somewhat. I don't really know what's happening with Arsenal. They seem to still have the quality of players. I think Lacazette was an upgrade, and has been doing reasonably well. Sanchez is still capable, as he did last night, of scoring and winning games. There doesn't seem to be quite the right balance in central midfield. I think Xhaka is a creative player. I think he's a playmaker, possibly even somebody who should be up towards the 10 position, but because they've got Ozil in that role, and because Xhaka is a little hard bastard who likes fouling people, he's used as a kind of screening midfielder, which he is not. And I think as he gets pushed up more, Arsenal play better, but there's still definitely a gap there. The wing-backs seem to be working quite well, but they are overly reliant on Koscielny in defence, who's still one of the top central defenders in the league, but around him, there's a lot of individual bits that look good for Arsenal, but Wenger seems to have lost the ability to weave it all together in quite the same way that he has done before.
Sure. I think the interesting thing as well that we've touched on before is their formational shift, which is the first really that we've seen under Wenger in many, many seasons. So worthy of note, I would say.
Yeah.
Burnley in 7th place, a team I have
Burnley.
been following. I think Burnley are lovely too. And listeners to the podcast and viewers of the YouTube channel will probably have noticed our like for Burnley. 20 games played, 9 games won. They are on 33 points, which I believe, it's an old cliche, Alex, but if you'd offered that before the season started, what do you think? Hello?
I think if they didn't win another game this season, they still wouldn't be relegated.
Right, which is brilliant, isn't it?
Which is remarkable. I mean, I know
it's
40
testament
is supposed
to their work ethic and their setup, right? You know, they aren't. This is the thing about Burnley is, as we've shown in some of our videos this season, what they do is incredibly calculated, and they work incredibly hard to make sure that they do it well. That's what football's all about, right?
If you've not got 350 million to spend on fullbacks, then yeah, it's get a plan that suits the players that you've got, and then stick to that plan, and then bring in other players who are able to do that. I think massive props have to go to Nick Pope, who's stepped into, Tom Heaton was arguably the best goalkeeper in the league last season, and due to his injury, Pope's had to come in and has done very, very well. James Tarkovsky is the outstanding new player of the season, I would suggest. He was very able at Brentford, and I saw him play there a couple of times, and then moved to Burnley and wasn't able to kind of get in on the Ben Mee Michael Keane partnership, understandably, but he's now come in and is playing exceptionally well. So, Burnley do what they do, and they do it very ably. And it's odd. It's almost because it's such a throwback, and I mean that a throwback offensively. I think defensively they're very sophisticated, but that pushing it up to big physical forwards like Vokes or Ashley Barnes is something that teams do still struggle to deal with. It's like Troy Deeney was saying in the aftermath of Watford beating Arsenal. Just having somebody who really physically pressures these kind of elegant, willowy ball-playing centre-backs that you seem to now get, and they don't like it. And I think sometimes it is very reductive, and it can be annoying to hear pundits, and I'm not saying we're pundits in that way, but to say, oh, it's about wanting it more, or it's about getting up them, that kind of stuff. But if a team's style is predicated on playing out from the back, they need to have a certain kind of centre-back, and with one or two exceptions, Alfie Mawson, for example, the ball-playing centre-backs tend not to be quite so good physically. Van Dijk is another exception to that, I'd say. And it is possible to disrupt those teams by working hard, pressuring those centre-backs, disrupting the rhythm of the play, and just being stronger. Burnley are doing that, and it's credit to them and to Sean Dyche.
Okay, we've officially reached mid-table now, 8th place. I think since we're at half an hour already, we should probably move to one-word summations just for the next few teams. Let's see how it goes. Leicester City.
It's Claude Puel's rehabilitation, and I'm very happy for him.
Okay, that's one sentence, but that's probably better.
Okay.
9th place, Everton, 27 points, same as Leicester.
Wayne Rooney's better than we thought he was, but not as good as he thinks he is, and they're over-reliant on him.
I thought you were going to go for something surreal, like Wayne Rooney's dream box of love.
No, I don't really do surreal, sorry.
Watford are in 10th place, 25 points. They did have a streak of losses, did very well at the beginning of the season, but they've just won their last game, which is a nice green in a sea of red, Alex.
Yeah, I think Richarlison, one of the signings of the season, although he's not scoring as many as he ought to if you look at most XG tables. Sorry to bring that up. Miguel Britos is one of the unsung heroes defensively in the league at the moment, and I'd say they're probably exceeding expectations under a very good young manager.
Mm-hmm. The next three, 11th, 12th and 13th, is Huddersfield, Brighton and Stoke, all on course for 40 points probably at the end of the season. I would say that Stoke are likely less happy with that than Brighton and Huddersfield would be.
Oh, massively. I think Huddersfield and Brighton will be delighted. They've more or less stayed with the style that they used in the Championship. and it's great credit to them. David Wagner's Christmas video, by the way, was hilarious. if you haven't seen that, Stoke are a real disappointment. I think this season you would expect them to be above those two sides. You'd probably expect them to be above Watford as well.
Well, win and a draw in the last two games. It's taken the pressure slightly off of Mark Hughes, but you would imagine that would return if he doesn't resolve it permanently sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and it's not a good time, Wenger aside, to be a long-standing manager in the league. People are like Pulis and getting removed. I think there's a creeping realization that actually, you can bring in young people from outside like Marco Silva, and shock horror, they're actually quite good. So if anyone's in danger currently, it's probably Mark Hughes.
Okay, 14th place, Southampton. 2 draws and 3 losses in the last 5 games. 19 points. Again, another massive underachiever this season. Of course, they've just sold Van Dijk for what I think is a reported fee of 70 million, rising to 75. So are they going to spend that on a striker?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Austin has played well, but then got the ban for that stupid and, naughty, nasty challenge on Jonas Lössl. So he's only out for 3 games, and that might coincide with an injury anyway. So I don't think they necessarily need to buy a striker. I don't understand Southampton, and I'm a Southampton fan, and I watch them, and it's the same problem of lots of possession, lots of passes, but that final ball and the finish just isn't quite there, and I don't really know how it's not there, because we've got players like Dusan Tadic and Nathan Redmond, who are creative, capable players, Sofiane Boufal.
And you're hitting the post a lot as well.
Yeah, it's like Bournemouth last season. I think I have confidence in the manager. I just feel like Austin's suspension was really, really poorly timed, because he's just starting to get into a run of goal-scoring form, and that could have been sufficient. We'll be fine. We're not going to go down, but I think at the moment we need to take a deep breath and work out exactly what's happening, because it isn't working at the moment.
2 points off the relegation zone with a sea of grey and red in terms of form, draws and losses. The other teams around you are all showing a little bit of green. By way, I mean wins.
Yeah, not Bournemouth or West Brom. I kind of feel
not
like
Bournemouth or West Brom.
I feel like there's enough. We are better by enough of a margin than
there's enough chuff below.
Enough of the teams below us. Yeah, and I'd also, if I was Stoke, I would be worried about dropping off a bit. I think Swansea and West Brom are the team we're most like is Bournemouth. We play a similar style to Bournemouth, and we're not getting results and they're not getting results. And I think the difference is clinical goal scoring at the moment. If we can address that, we'll be fine. And I suspect if Bournemouth can address that, they'll be fine also.
15th place, Newcastle United, 18 points. A team I thought were doing better. What's going on here?
That's because they were. Right. And they were up comfortably mid-table for quite some time. I don't actually particularly know what's happening there. I've seen that there's a reasonable amount of dissatisfaction. I think the midfield's being chopped and changed quite a lot, and people aren't entirely sure why that's happening. I think also if you're going into a Premier League season and Dwight Gale is your main striker, you've probably got issues.
We know about their spending issues.
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot going on behind the scenes at the moment with the putative sale and so on. So that's got to have if there's a manager who can steer them through that, it's Benitez, because he's very competent and he's very experienced.
On another note, I often think Newcastle would be, one of the best propositions for a wealthy foreign billionaire. in terms of buying a football club. They've got one of the biggest grounds in the league, in the country even. They've got a huge supporters base. They've got a history of trophies. They're the perfect team for someone to snap up and spend lots of money on. Not that I advocate for that. I think that's a bad thing anyway. But I'm just saying, in the current state of things, I'm surprised that hasn't already happened.
No, I agree. And I'm not sure why that would be.
Yeah. Maybe they know something we don't. 16th place, Crystal Palace, a team who at the beginning of the season, obviously not right at the beginning, but after the initial 4 or 5 games, we thought would never get out of 20th place, but they have.
They have. Big Roy.
They're in 16th, Alex. That's a difference of 4.
Big Roy and his organisation.
Right. Well, they hadn't scored any goals before he was employed, which was 7 or 8 games or something absurd.
It was ridiculous, wasn't it? Yeah. And now they've managed to score a whopping 18. It's hugely impressive.
18 goals.
They've got stuff in place to be a reasonable side. They're not going to be better than reasonable, but they definitely shouldn't be in the position that they are. And it's, they have returned, and we had a long conversation about, I can't remember, a couple of months back, about recruiting a manager that suits your club. And if it doesn't, by suiting your club, I mean suiting the playing staff you already have in place. And if not, then fully supporting that manager with the acquisitions to allow him to gradually change that playing squad into how he wants them to be over time. And they recruited entirely the wrong manager to start with, and they've gone back to somebody who's very steady, defensively organised, and comfortable playing a kind of direct style that suits having people like Wilfried Zaha, Andros Townsend, and then the big lad up front, which they do, and it's working. It's not particularly pleasant to watch. And
only 2 losses since the beginning of November, and that was against Tottenham and Arsenal. You can't really blame them for that. But in that time, they've beaten impressive teams. They beat Leicester 3-0 away from home, and of course we know that Watford aren't doing brilliantly direct mid-table, but they've beaten Watford as well. It's a marked improvement, isn't it?
Oh, massively, and in much the same way that Allardyce has sparked an improvement at Everton, and Dyche has been doing superbly at Burnley. There is something to be said for finding a system that works for your players, that is not, as complicated or as philosophically backed up as the way that, say, a Man City plays, and just saying, look, we're quick on the wings. It's like Allardyce bringing in Aaron Lennon, who'd been on the sidelines for quite some time. Aaron Lennon is very good at basically one thing, and that's running quickly and then delivering across.
He's a trad winger.
Right. And, when people are playing with inside forwards that like to cut inside and fullbacks that like to overlap and all the rest of it, the one area where you can threaten other teams that do that is by having a traditional quick winger who stays very wide. It isn't rocket science. Palace in Zaha have got an exceptional player. Roy Hodgson very sensibly is focusing on be defensively solid and get the ball to Zaha.
Okay, 4 teams left, 17th place. West Ham United, only 1 loss in the last 5 games, so potential improvement. I don't know. You tell me, Alex.
It's obvious. Yeah, it is an improvement. I think we looked before at how this team and the way that they were set up to play would suit David Moyes. And Moyes has, I suppose to a degree, he's reverted to his uber-cautious Sunderland approach. And I don't think that necessarily benefits them, but it will tighten them up. It will stop them leaking quite so many goals. They've conceded a lot.
By the way, who is Pardew in charge of now? Or did I dream this?
I don't think Pardew's in charge of anyone, is he?
Maybe I've dreamed it. I think he is.
It'll be easy enough to find out.
That's what I'm doing. He's the current manager of West Brom. The former, yeah.
Oh.
I saw, honestly, thank fuck it's not just me, Alex. I saw this about a week ago, and I thought it happened a month before that. It happened in November, and I thought, how have I missed this? I think they're so synonymous with Tony Pulis, like you forget that he's gone.
I mean, I knew that he'd gone. I just
right, yeah, I missed Pardew too, mate. I missed it too.
God,
what do we call ourselves? Football observers.
I do love the fact that in 2003 the BBC described Pardew as being, quote, a dangerous and distant animal. So,
well, based on what?
Referring to his lack of public relations abilities, which has led him to making several rash comments. And there is a Wikipedia page citation for that, so we can say it fairly. Yeah.
Who was on the news desk that day?
Stuart Roach wrote that for the BBC. Well done, Stuart, for that line.
Well, we're not at them yet anyway. They're 2 more teams off. Apology. I think it's literally because we made quite a few West Brom videos towards the end of last season under the heady days of Tony Pulis. So we looked
at when they were good at set pieces.
Yeah, we did that, and we hadn't gone back. So it's not surprising that neither of us know. I mean, I don't hang around to watch that on Match of the Day. But I thought that was very funny. I'm glad you said the same. Yeah. Because I couldn't believe that I'd missed it.
No.
Maybe the listeners won't know. In fact, that's quite a good that's quite a good comment. Well, it could be breaking news for you.
It's not like there's a clamour in the user comments for, please explain the role of Claudio Jacob to us.
But yeah, if you didn't know this either, do leave us a comment so we know it's not just us. But back to West Ham, David Moyes, 1 loss in the last 5 games. Not bad. Well, but obviously quite bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not ideal, and only Stoke have conceded more goals. But that's what he'll hopefully tighten up somewhat. I think West Ham are one of those clubs that are so in transition off the field with all of the, there's still this kind of legacy of what happened with the move to the Olympic Stadium, and there was obviously reports recently about how much they were making out of that and the taxpayer footing the bill, and there's a degree of uncertainty. They've got very irascible owners who are not shy about criticising players, and yeah, there was that recent tweet or was it a tweet or was it an interview where Gold or O'Sullivan was saying, my kids urged me not to buy these players, including Snodgrass, who's now out on loan. And obviously the players are then going, well, cheers for that. So I think it's a difficult situation to be in, but I can see them sort of climbing slowly and tediously away from relegation.
Well, the word was for a while that they were looking to sell anyway, and to be honest, that makes an awful lot of sense to me, because look, they've just moved in to the London Stadium, once the Olympic Stadium. As we've mentioned, that financial arrangement it's pretty great for West Ham. We've got alternative views on that as well. I spoke to James Montague about this in a podcast 5 or 6 weeks ago, and he thinks that the atmosphere of the stadium and the move and the lack of culture around that area and around that stadium will negatively affect the team to such a point that it will actually be a disadvantage.
Oh yeah, but I mean, look at when Spurs were playing games at Wembley.
Well, they still are.
Yes, but they did a. I suppose it's a bit different now, maybe because they're used to it. But the impact on them when they were doing that before was
initially,
was sizable, and it takes time to adapt, and it takes time to get used to it. And you get a group of fans who can't be asked to travel that bit further, and like you say, there's a lack of that sense of it being, particularly as the Boleyn ground was so firmly centrally within that area of West Ham.
Imagine if you loved football and you bought.
Thank God we don't.
Or rented I know, right? Or bought or rented a flat near the stadium, like right next to it, because you love it so much that you want every weekend to be In fact, this reminds me of quite an amusing story. I will tangent for a mere 30 seconds, Alex. Mark Leach, who we've spoken to on the podcast before. Mark Leach is a Premier League football photographer. He's a fascinating man with, ironically enough, a bit of a photographic memory. He's full of stories, and he once told me a story about travelling back from Manchester. I'm not sure where he was, somewhere in the north. On a holiday. He had his wife and his kids in the car, and they were travelling through Stoke, and they thought they might stop off to grab some food. And he, instead of getting food, he got out of the car and started wandering around the town looking for the location of the old stadium, the name of which I've forgotten, before the Britannia was built. And he thought he found where it was. It was a big block of flats now, and they was on a little road nearby. And an old woman came out and she said, "Oh, you're right. What are you looking for?" And he said, "Oh, is this where the road where the stadium used to be?" And she said, "Oh, yes." And she started, telling him stories about how bricks were coming through the window in the olden days, and all the police horses outside, and all the rubbish in the street, and how much damage was done to her property. And Mark says, "Oh, I bet you don't miss it." And she goes, "Oh no, I really do. The weekends are too quiet now." But yeah, imagine if you bought a flat near no, there's not enough street violence. If you bought a flat near the Billing Ground on that basis, then it was gone.
Yeah,
it's a meaningless tangent, but they're in 17th nevertheless. I've used up all that time telling an anecdote that wasn't mine. 18th place, AFC Bournemouth. Okay, we're in the relegation zone now.
Yeah.
No wins in the last 5 games that I can see. 17 points. It's not over. Obviously, it's very tight down there. And in theory, with 1 win and a bunch of other losses, they could be up in 13th.
True. They are basically Southampton with a slightly less good squad.
What's going on with Eddie Howe? Because he was, of course, tipped for every job under the sun.
Yeah. Perhaps
because he's young and British, like a sort of Premier League affirmative action thing. But what's going on with him now?
I mean, Bournemouth, they have not adapted their style all that much. They're still playing the same sort of way, and it can be the margins of just making a few more defensive errors and finishing fewer chances, and all of a sudden, rather than playing a kind of swaggering possession style of football that sees you up in 10th or 9th, you're down in 18th and struggling. Because the margins are incredibly fine. And their goal difference is minus 13, which is, it's better than Huddersfield, it's better than Stoke, it's better than Palace and West Ham, and those teams are all above them. So,
what about this for a run of games? From the 13th of December to the 23rd, Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester City.
Well, that's 0 points.
That is 0 points, and actually one of them was the quarter-final of the EFL Cup, which they lost to Chelsea.
The Carabao.
The Carabao?
That's what it's called now, the Carabao Cup.
It just says the EFL Cup here.
Okay. It's
fine.
Like a shit Red Bull.
What's Carabao? It's an energy drink.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think Bournemouth are in significant trouble, because I can't see that they've got the investment to bring in anybody particularly stellar over the January break. And I think unlike particularly West Ham and Palace, where there's been a style transition that could benefit both of those squads, they're not going to change their style anytime soon. And they don't have the experience and nous of a Benitez, who I think will keep Newcastle out of trouble. So Bournemouth could...
On a positive note, though, Alan Pardew does manage the team just below them, so they're probably unlikely to lose ground there. West Bromwich Albion, 19th place, 15 points.
Gone.
Starting to look a little bit more difficult now. 3 points from safety. That's a wish and a prayer, isn't it? And also no wins in the last 5 games.
I've got more confidence in Swansea escaping relegation than West Brom. I'll say that now.
I reckon, given that we didn't know Alan Pardew was the manager until
we shouldn't say all that much.
We shouldn't say all that much. Let's just move on to Swansea and talk about why you're confident. Because Paul Clement, who of course made a name for himself as the assistant manager of a Real Madrid team, has managed to get Swansea City 13 points so far. So, Why are you confident about that? They are now, let me do some maths in my head, 5 points off of safety. That's quite a long way at this point in the season. You would be looking at Swansea naturally and thinking,
Yeah, you would. But they've got Leon Britton in the coaching staff.
Right.
I'd have given Leon Britton the job full time. I love Leon Britton.
I think you're the only person who, not that loves Leon Britton, I'm sure that his family love him.
No, but John McKenzie loves him.
Right, John McKenzie, okay. Well, so what's the reason for loving Leon Britton? Why do you think that he is going to help them?
Because when Britton was a player, he sort of encapsulated the quote-unquote Swansea way of possession-based football and a kind of a nice rhythm, moving the ball around, probing for gaps, and then attacking, which it was the way that Brendan Rodgers had them playing, and it was really, really good to watch. And they kind of, I think part of the issue of having, 7 managers in 2 seasons or 3 seasons is that you do lose that sense of what's the way that we're supposed to play, and are we... I just think they got confused. I think you had a squad who were being asked to do different things so regularly. Maybe if Britain's influence increases, then they'll be able to start playing that style again with some success. I think credit has to go to Fabianski and Mawson, who are both playing well currently, despite everything else that's going on around them. But I don't know. I just feel there's something about them that I'll probably be horribly wrong about this, and it could be like blind optimism rather than anything analytical, but I just have a feeling they might be okay.
Okay, well, I love that in the context of what we do at Tifo, which is, of course, dry tactical analysis most of the time. We look at statistics, we look at the way that teams are setting up and playing, and we can predict outcomes reasonably successfully, in most cases, I should say. But on this basis, Alex Stewart has a feeling that Swansea City will be fine. So do you hear that, South Wales? Don't worry about it. It's all going to be good.
I once made the mistake of using analytics to show that Swansea were quite good at crossing, and that they should be crossing the ball more, and then got a flood of angry comments from Swansea fans going, "Oh, you obviously never watched us, and you're a useless human being." And I had, because when I do these videos and stuff, I do actually watch things. Otherwise, it's a bit pointless. I don't know. Yeah, there's no point in doing Swansea currently, because the new guy Carvajal's got to kind of bed in and establish his.
They've got a new guy.
Yeah, Britain was only in charge for 1 game. You see, I'm up with Swansea. Swansea's fine. I pay attention to them.
I thought Paul Clement was their manager.
No, he's not anymore. He got sacked, man. And then Britain...
Right, listen. It's a good job that I'm just the presenter of this podcast, and I just say the words that you write.
I didn't write any words.
I feel like we've made a bad impression today.
Well, I think it's...
I don't know what's going on.
It's Christmas. It's fine.
Yeah.
This, our gift is a little bit of ignorance.
I don't know if that's true, but that's certainly positive thinking.
I think so.
Okay, well, thanks to everyone for downloading this episode. As previously discussed, Alex and I will be starting the Tifo Tactics podcast at some point in January. The only reason it's not out this first week, and this isn't the first episode, is because we don't want to rush it. We want to work out the format. We're still working on how it's going to be recorded and everything each week, and we're also doing things like thinking about potential additional segments where we could go out and interview coaches, or we could talk about training and stuff like that. So that's the reason that we're not rushing it. It still definitely is happening. Of course, Josh's podcast, This Football Life, the first episodes of that, I should say, will be out on the Wednesday of this week, which I believe is the 3rd of January.
I'm very excited for those.
Yeah, me too. Well, we're going to kick it off with 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Bruce Grobbelaar is the first one, and one of the other 2 is Manchester United's, who was Manchester United's, I can't remember, it's touchline doctor. What do they call them? Fitness man. Physio, that's the one.
The guy that runs on with the gloves.
That's the one.
And applies water.
Anyway, he worked with Ferguson for 20 years, and Josh asked him all about his career and his job.
I mean, these are brilliant interviews that will be very, very worth listening to.
They will be, and they're out. The first 3 are on the 3rd of January, so make sure that when we tell you to, you go and subscribe to it. Okay, thanks very much for listening. Alex Stewart, thanks for joining us, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks very much, and Happy New Year, everyone.